What happens when science, power, and human error collide? From Chernobyl's exploding core to Japan's glowing ocean, here are the nuclear disasters the world can't afford to forget. Chernobyl, 1986, the nuclear test that blew up a city. Think just a test sounds safe? Not when it's 1986 in the Soviet Union, and you're testing a nuclear reactor at night with tired engineers who have been told to ignore every warning system. Yes, welcome to Chernobyl, the site of the biggest nuclear oops in human history. The plan? Run a safety drill. The result? Blow up a nuclear core. They wanted to see what would happen if the power went out. So, like geniuses, they turned off the emergency systems, one by one. Then the reactor got unstable. Someone panicked. Boom! Pressure exploded. The core ripped open, and radioactive fire shot into the sky. People in nearby towns saw a glowing cloud and thought, must be a light show. Nope, that was death glitter. 2 workers died instantly, dozens more in the weeks after. Thousands were exposed. 200,000 people were evacuated. And the cleanup? They sent in robots, but they broke down, so they sent in humans, in t-shirts and jeans. Seriously. The Soviet Union tried to cover it up, but the radiation said, "Surprise, Sweden," because the wind carried it across Europe. Today, Chernobyl is a ghost city, and that test, let's just say, it failed spectacularly. Fukushima, 2011, the disaster that surfed in. March 11th, 2011, Japan gets hit by a massive 9-point earthquake. Buildings sway like noodles, but Mother Nature isn't done yet. She sends a 14-meter tsunami straight at the coast. And guess what's waiting there? A nuclear power plant. The Fukushima Daiichi plant had 6 reactors and a terrible sense of timing. When the earthquake hit, the reactors automatically shut down. Great! But they needed cooling, so the emergency generators kicked in. Then the tsunami showed up and said, nope. The waves crashed over the sea wall, flooded the backup generators, and knocked everything out. With no cooling, the temperature rose. Fuel rods melted, hydrogen built up, then boom, boom, boom. 3 massive explosions in 3 separate reactors. The plant looked like a Michael Bay movie. Radiation started leaking. The government said everything's under control. Spoiler alert, it wasn't. Over 150,000 people evacuated. Farmers had to kill livestock they couldn't sell. Contaminated water leaked into the Pacific Ocean. Japan went from sushi to radioactive sushi rumors. Robots sent inside kept dying. The radiation was that bad. Eventually, they had to build a giant ice wall to freeze the ground and stop the spread. Even now, cleanup is expected to take 30 to 40 years. Fukushima wasn't caused by war. It wasn't sabotage. It was nature saying, bet you didn't plan for this one. Kyshtym, 1957, the nuclear disaster nobody was allowed to know about. Imagine a nuclear disaster so big it spread radiation over 20,000 square kilometers, forced 10,000 people to evacuate, and created a radioactive dead zone called the East Ural Radioactive Trace. Welcome to Kyshtym 1957, the 3rd worst nuclear disaster in history that the Soviet Union kept secret for 30 years. So, what happened? In the town of Chelyabinsk 40, a place so secret it didn't appear on any map, the Soviets were busy building nuclear bombs. At the Mayak plant, They stored highly radioactive waste in cooling tanks. One tank, its cooling system failed for a year. But hey, why fix it when you can ignore it? The waste overheated, pressure built up, and on September 29th, 1957, the tank exploded with a force of 75 tons of TNT. It blasted a plume of radioactive dust into the sky. No alarms, no media, just glowing silence. The Soviet response? Send in soldiers, evacuate villages quietly, tell no one. Even the people being evacuated didn't know why they had to leave. It wasn't until Western satellites noticed something weird in the 1970s that the world went, wait, what happened in Russia? Today, many parts of that zone are still uninhabitable, and Chelyabinsk, it became known as the most polluted place on Earth. Kyshtym is proof that when you mix radiation with secrecy, you don't just get disaster, you get a cover-up glowing in the dark. SL-1, 1961, the nuclear reactor that yeeted a man into the ceiling. Let's talk about America's only fatal nuclear reactor accident. And yes, it involves a guy being launched into the ceiling. Welcome to SL-1, 1961, an experimental nuclear reactor in Idaho. Tiny, remote, and built for military research. What could go wrong? 3 men were working the night shift during the New Year holiday. Cold, bored, cramped. Now, nuclear reactors have control rods that regulate how fast reactions happen. You pull them out, the reaction speeds up. You push them in, it slows down. One rod, the central one, was stuck, and one of the men decided to give it a good yank. But he pulled it too far, too fast, by 20 inches. In less than 4 milliseconds, the core went supercritical. Massive steam explosion. The 26,000-pound reactor jumped off the ground, and one of the men, he was impaled through the pelvis by a metal rod and pinned to the ceiling. The other 2 were killed instantly. The radiation was so high that even rescuers needed robot arms and lead suits. Then they buried the victims in lead-lined coffins inside concrete vaults. And the reactor? Disassembled, buried, forgotten. Like a haunted science experiment nobody wants to talk about. So yeah, nuclear energy is powerful. And apparently, so are control rods in the hands of bored engineers. Windscale fire, 1957. The nuclear disaster Britain pretended didn't happen. Let's talk about the UK's first and biggest nuclear disaster. Welcome to Windscale, 1957. Back then, Britain was racing to build nuclear bombs. They rushed the science. Because, hey, what could go wrong with a superheated reactor made of graphite? At Windscale, they use uranium fuel rods inside graphite bricks, and to release built-up energy, they do something called Wigner annealing. Basically, heating the reactor on purpose. Except, this time, it overheated. Sensors were ignored, warning signs were missed, and suddenly, whoosh! The core caught fire. Yes, a nuclear reactor was literally on fire. Cooling fans made it worse. Carbon dioxide? Not enough. Eventually, they just grabbed a hose and sprayed water into a burning nuclear core. Miraculously, it worked, but too late. The fire burned for 3 days, releasing clouds of radioactive iodine and polonium. The government said nothing. They quietly destroyed 2 million liters of contaminated milk, but didn't tell the public until years later. To this day, Windscale fire is believed to have caused hundreds of cancer deaths, and in the most British way possible, they changed the name of the plant afterward to Sellafield, like rebranding a bad restaurant. So remember, when your reactor is on fire, maybe don't just spray it with a garden hose and hope for the best. Welcome to Goiânia, 1987. The glowing blue trash that killed people. Two scrap metal scavengers entered an abandoned cancer clinic. They found an old radiotherapy machine. It looked valuable, so they took it home and smashed it open. Inside was a capsule containing cesium-137, a radioactive isotope. It glowed blue in the dark, like something out of a superhero movie. Except this wasn't Marvel. It was lethal. They showed it off. Neighbors came to see the magic dust. Kids played with it. One guy rubbed it on his skin like body glitter. Another ate a sandwich with it on his hands. Within days, people started vomiting, bleeding, and losing hair. But no one knew why. By the time authorities realized what it was, 249 people were contaminated. 4 died painfully, including a 6-year-old girl who loved the glowing dust. Her body was so radioactive, she had to be buried in a lead-lined coffin inside a concrete vault. The house demolished. The soil removed. Even the guy who first found the capsule said, "I wish I'd never touched that thing." Goiânia wasn't a reactor meltdown. It was a human curiosity meltdown. Lesson of the day: if something glows in the dark, maybe don't touch it. Tokaimura, 1999. The day someone mixed uranium in a bucket. Japan, 1999. A nuclear fuel processing facility in Tokaimura was trying to speed up production, so they changed the procedure. Instead of carefully using automated equipment, 2 workers were told to pour uranium solution by hand into a steel bucket. Yes, you heard that right. They were manually mixing weapons-grade uranium like it was soup. They poured in 1 batch, no problem. Poured in a second, still fine. Then they added the 3rd batch, and boom! The solution went critical. A blue flash filled the room. Radiation started pouring out. One worker got so much radiation, his DNA was liquefied. He survived 83 days in agony with his skin falling off, organs failing one by one. The 2nd worker died later. The 3rd was seriously injured but lived. The reaction continued for 20 hours because nobody could get close enough to stop it without dying. Eventually, they drained the tank and shut it down. The fallout? Hundreds were exposed, a town was evacuated, and Japan rewrote its entire nuclear safety rulebook. So, what went wrong? Simple. Someone used a metal bucket to handle uranium fuel. Lesson learned: when your job involves radioactive material, eyeballing the dose is not the way to go.